Hi, Richard. Hi, Don. Welcome to Nothing Media. So grateful that you're doing this. The first question is the obvious question that everybody wants to ask, and you can answer separately, of course. How did this apparent thing that never happened happen apparently to no one?
Well, it's, of course, an impossible question to answer, but we try to describe it. What happened here, I'll keep it pretty brief. What happened here is what often happens. There was a kind of an initial and very momentary opening, very unexpected, very shocking, in which the way I put it in retrospect is in which the kind of the emptiness of everything was seen. And the shock in that actually, in a way, wasn't the emptiness in everything, it was the emptiness in this. So it's like the really shocking thing was the emptiness of the person. So like that kind of realization that the one who had been searching for so long to find the secret of life, the secret of enlightenment or whatever, didn't actually exist. And then there was a kind of lot of fallout from that over the next year, I would say. And then there was another opening which lasted for a longer period of time in the story of this character, if you like. And the only brief way I can describe that is that in that second opening, the emptiness of everything was seen again, but this time the fullness of everything was also seen. You know, that everything is at the same time both empty and full. And as I'm saying that, of course, as always, I know that this sounds paradoxical or possibly even mad, but that's nevertheless the closest I can get to describing it in words. And I think the only thing that I would add to that as important in a very brief description is that, you know, if the natural question is, well, if you're saying the emptiness was seen and the fullness, what does the fullness mean? What does that mean? All I can say is that the fullness was love. It was simply love. And if we want to qualify that a little bit, it's unqualified love. It's unconditional love, that everything is simply, I can only say, let's say, an outpouring of unconditional love. And I would say with that, then it's kind of just over. You know, the search is over. The life of the person or the character that thought they were a person is over. And then after that, it's just stuff happening. Whatever happens, happens. So yeah, that's a brief description.
Yeah. Beautifully expressed. Go ahead, Don.
All right, so I didn't know anything about non-duality, so I was out one day walking around the cemetery near where I live, and suddenly it just occurred to me, I was listening to thoughts in my head, and that's not me. There was a recognition, that's not who I am. And it just seemed to be happening spontaneously. And it was just a very simple recognition, as if, well, everybody must know that they're not their mind. And then later when I was home, I sort of became aware of an absolute weightlessness. And I was aware that there's no one here. And I had this thought, oh, I've had a psychotic breakdown. And so, you know, this continued. And I didn't tell anybody about it because I felt embarrassed that something bad had happened. And all I can say is, following this, there's suddenly this equilibrium that I'd never had before. So the kind of downs and the ups had kind of fallen away, and there was just this sort of a kind of dull period, but like something had died. And this continued for quite a while. And I'd heard of then I came to hear about non-duality, and you know, and I got very interested in it, but I didn't have a clue what it was about really. And I met some spiritual teacher, and I went out with them to a cafe, and I sat opposite them. And the first thing I did was just really lean over to them and just catch their eye and just really just stare at them. And suddenly this weight, this huge weight I felt, my chest left, and there was just this flooding of love and just this seeing of everything is love, and which was amazing, absolute relief. And the mind totally dissolved in that. And that for that whole week, it just seemed to get deeper and deeper, the love. And like there was also bliss, so thick, almost like walking through it. I was walking really, really slowly. And I remember being in a restaurant with my partner at the time, and suddenly it just seemed to get so thick. I was mesmerized because I was seeing everything as if for the first time, and the beauty, the absolute beauty of that was so breathtaking. I could see the energy of trees, this vibration of energy, and we're in the restaurant and sat at our normal table by the window in this Moroccan restaurant, and like I forgot how to eat. I didn't know how to chew my food. It was like I'm chewing for the first time, right? And then I suddenly became aware of like very, very suddenly seeing, actually visually, nothing was doing everything. That there was no one here, and there was no one anywhere. There's no things, but in that everything was appearing, and it was all being done. And so there's absolute silence as well. And I couldn't understand what my partner was saying, but just he was talking away, and I thought, isn't it so funny? It's conversation seems so small. Why do you want to talk? I mean, wow. there's this like, yeah. So, I mean, he was aware. Actually, he was an artist, so he was aware that all the tension had left my face. He'd never seen me look the way I looked, so he was kind of all over me, which was really annoying at the time. But yeah. So then we parted our ways, and yeah, things kind of continued for a long time where I just really, all I could do was sit around and just look at, you know, particularly the sky and trees. It was so absorbing. It was just absolutely amazing. Yeah. So.
It's beautiful, Dawn. It reminds me of a movie scene when Harry met Sally. You know, and have you seen that movie? How about just having?
Oh yeah. That's brilliant.
And in this story, how did you guys meet?
All right. Well, it was after. It's funny because I knew if Richard had went to one of his meetings, and I remember thinking, oh, look, you know, he's not just talking about non-duality. There's a film reference, there's a book reference, because I'm very much into poetry, philosophy, literature, and all these different references. And I was like, cool, you know. So it was just one day I was out for lunch with a friend, and ended up in Lagaff after Tony's meeting, and yeah, so I sort of initiated conversation with Richard. Yeah, I don't know whether to go into the details of it, but yeah. I was told that I was flirting outrageously with Richard and by a friend, and said, you know, you don't want to be doing that. So then Richard was going at the time, and I said to him, I've just been told I'm flirting with you. And he said, are you flirting with me? And I said, well, yes, I guess I am. And then it sort of yeah, that all kind of started from there, didn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, it kind of escalated from there.
Yeah, and you came back to mine. I think you were impressed with my bookcases. You were like, oh yes.
Yeah, that was a couple of days later. Yeah. I was just sitting very innocently in this cafe, you know, minding my own business, and suddenly there was this wonderful person there talking to me. And yes, a couple of days later, I was very, very impressed with your bookcases. Yeah, but no, not the bookcases, not at all. It wasn't the furniture. No, I was very impressed with the volumes on your bookcases, and I was particularly noticing how many of them match the volumes on my bookcases. I thought, oh, maybe there's a kindred spirit here. Yeah. Yeah.
So to summarize, you found Richard ridiculously good looking.
Oh, of course.
And vice versa.
Oh, sweet. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about is a little bit about you're a psychotherapist, and Richard, were you a psychotherapist before too?
I trained in a lot of therapeutic approaches, and I taught therapeutic approaches in education and in counseling and things like that. Yeah, I'm not actually a psychotherapist.
Okay, my question is for Don then. So you're a psychotherapist, you're a practicing psychotherapist. How do you integrate non-duality in psychotherapy?
Why do you integrate it? Well, it's just
or why or whatever.
Well, so yeah, I mean, I understand that the emotions work very differently for some people. So the risk, if you're with a psychotherapist who doesn't get this, the risk is you might end up being seen as someone who's disassociated from your emotions. You might be expected to function in a certain way, because most people go in and out of feelings all the time, and actually, with a lot of awakened people, there's just a lot of emotional neutrality. Also, there's no expectation that somebody has lost someone that a natural grieving process will arise. It may or may not, and or natural anger responses or whatever. But basically, there can be a reluctance as well to go into the story, but it doesn't really matter whether you hold that to be true or absolute in any sense. Actually, the patterns emerge from the story. They're very helpful to dealing with things that arise now as well. So, the keys to unlocking a problem that arises now sometimes come from childhood, the story around that. So, yeah, it's good just to have no ideas about someone, and to accept what they bring, and they feel much more relaxed, and they'll bring all their energetic experiences as well that often accompany, like Kundalini experiences, to other things that accompany them that might be a little bit embarrassed to tell a normal therapist, say. So yeah, and there's a lot of conditioning as well that has to fall away, I think, after awakening too. So there's that.
When I was seeking, I was going through depression and a lot of other stuff. And I did seek help. I did seek a psychotherapist help. And of course, I was beginning to dabble into non-duality. So it was very confusing for me. What would you advise for both of you, for someone that is, desperately seeking right now and is going through a lot of hitting a wall or getting into depression or even suicidal tendencies?
My advice would just to really not to fight that, to really try to accept the energy of that, and just to go into that, and to find somebody who will just create an open space for that to evolve in. The important thing with suicidal stuff as well, of course, is to be with someone who's not afraid of that. I had suicidal depression myself, so yeah, and just to explore things as they come up, and the energy of that as well, because awakening can take the sting out of that as well, because depression can be just felt as a kind of almost like a blissful low as well. So yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Richard.
No, I just going back to something that you said earlier, just the importance of being careful. If there's awakening phenomena going on, just the importance of being very careful who you share that with. Because you might feel, well, any therapist, for example, might be safe. No, absolutely not. It's really important, if possible, to find somebody to share that with who understands what's going on, because otherwise you may be pathologized. Just that. Otherwise you may be pathologized rather than being seen to be going through a process, if you like, which is both normal and in some ways, you know, rather magnificent and very fruitful, although also, of course, it can be painful. Yeah. I've been asked this question sort of many times over the years about, you know, who to see, what to, you know, whether to go to a psychotherapist or not. And my answer has always been, if possible, go to a psychotherapist who isn't there. And, you know, I think if the person kind of understands what I mean by that, then they'll know what to do. Go to a psychotherapist where the person has been seen through. Yeah, if possible.
I'm going to share something private. When in my seeking days, there was a time that I was kind of like, it's either enlightenment or bust. Yeah. It's either enlightenment or you know, I do it myself kind of thing. And I told the psychotherapist that and didn't have any answer for me.
Or bust? What do you mean by bust? Like
basically killing yourself, or you know,
right, okay.
or suicide. Yeah, because the character was just so desperate, right? He was just so desperate. At one point, he was getting into really lows and all that kind of stuff, and looking at the ocean, thinking of, you know, jumping. And I'm like, I'll just become the ocean, you know, because I've been holding on to these ideas about what enlightenment is.
Yeah, it's frustrating as hell. It is that energy as well. It's so much, isn't it? There's not anything left over that doesn't want that. It just takes you completely, doesn't it? And yeah.
I mean, here I would say there was a period, quite a long period, of absolute despair, just complete despair. But you know, it's difficult to explain, but some people will relate to that. There was something juicy about that despair. And I mean, previously to that, like many people, I'd had, you know, long periods of depression, although in my case, not particularly deep, you know, I mean, sort of functional depression, I might say. And then there was this period of absolute despair. And it was so juicy and alive and vital compared to depression. And when I've written about this and I've talked about it many times. And when I talk about, you know, how preferable despair is to depression, I mean, sometimes I'm met with looks of absolute blank incomprehension. And I know there is absolutely no point in trying to explain that, because the more I explain, the more mad the person I'm talking to or the people I'm talking to think I am. But sometimes when I say that, I'm just greeted with a look of total recognition. And I know, yeah, that's been recognized there as well. That, you know, there is something juicy and vital about despair. There can be, not there is, but there can be, which is absolutely not there in depression.
It's kind of like I compare it to watching, you know, a train crash or a crash site. You can't take your eyes off it, and that's kind of like almost like the dissolution or the annihilation of the character. It's just going through that despair and depression and almost wanting not to be there anymore. And I hear that story repeated over and over again from speakers, you know, speakers that have gone through a lot of this hitting the wall or getting into desperation. And I think the reason I picked up your book, Richard, was for a death wish. You know, I hope you die soon.
That's what it speaks to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Death wish.
Death wish. Yeah, that's a death wish. And so there's this kind of like conversation right now that there is you know, non-duality, and non-duality should not be with psychotherapy because it's a completely different thing. Any comment on that one?
Oh God, the problem is, like, because non-duality doesn't, I mean, it doesn't sort everything out, does it? I mean, repression can continue, and it certainly did in my own case. You know, there's things that after a time maybe bubble up to consciousness that you didn't realize. And in my case, it took a series of visions where I actually realized my view of reality was still skewed. So what I thought equality looked like was sort of me here and somebody else there. So I had to shift my whole view of reality really afterwards. So I think a lot of people do, they don't, because your defenses can be blown so open that you're actually quite vulnerable in a sense. So you might have to create boundaries from scratch. So there can be a lot of work to do. Not a lot of work to do, but a lot of realization on the level of psychology for sure. Which, yeah, and if it's not, if it isn't, if you don't address that, you can end up living in a situation where you can't actually express your newfound truth. You mean you find another kind of prison if you're with someone who's maybe toxic or not good for you, or you can remain stuck. I think, and I've come across that with a lot of people I've been speaking to recently. That so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if non-duality, I mean, non-duality is all embracing. It's all embracing. So obviously it embraces psychotherapy, so I mean, to me, in a way, saying, well, after non-duality, no psychotherapy, it's a bit like saying, after non-duality, no paying of your income tax bill. Well, good luck with that if that's the way you want to go.
I think things can be worked out and resolved much, much quicker after awakening. I think there's that, there's less of the need to process for a long, long period of time, because things are just much easier to accept. You accept things much easier and you move on, and that was the case for me. It's just, so this is what's going on, and that's it. I didn't need to actually work something through with someone. It's just recognizing something and then adapting to that, so it can be quite straightforward as well. You don't need to go through years working on an issue.
I wish I met you before, Dawn. That would have been really helpful. On that note, I'm talking to someone over Messenger. He's been like contacting me. He's been listening to Non-Duality. He just wanted to chat, and then one day we were chatting, and then he called me and he goes, Emerson, I was just, there was no one here anymore. It was just scrolling, what I don't know what happened, that kind of thing. And then the next time he called me and he said that I went through the biggest anxiety attack, Emerson. I was suicidal. Because there was that apparent dropping away. And what would you say to to someone that is going through kind of like had this apparent disappearance or dropping of me, and then goes into this depth of anxiety and suicidal thoughts almost. Well, not even almost, but it was there. The person actually called me back after maybe a couple of days and scared me a little bit and said that apparently the 9 years of social anxiety has dropped away.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, it can bring up an awful lot, because the thing is, if there's trauma in the system as well, this seeing can trigger that too. So a lot of energy can come up to be released as well. So a lot of anxiety can come up initially, and there's nothing you can do with that apart from know that that's okay, and it's and it's quite common, and just to be able to sit with that or talk it through, and it might take a while to kind of get used to things, and I don't know, but just to know that someone's holding that and understanding that is enough in itself, I think.
Issues can become much more visceral, I think,
Yeah.
can't they? Much more embodied, much less the endless run of the mental story going round and round in the brain, and much more felt in the physical or the psychophysical system in an embodied form, and can be extremely uncomfortable on that level. Yeah.
But being able to share it, I think, is really, really important. If you're alone with this stuff, it's not good for you sometimes. I think if you're getting a big emotional, fallout as well from it, and it can affect your sleep massively too. A lot of insomnia So that can make you feel a little bit crazy too. So, you know.
It's focused in my own training. I was very, very much drawn to, I mean, what would maybe generically be known as sort of body work kind of therapies, sort of working on that kind of level anyway, that the interface, if you like, between the mind-body systems, as it were. I was much more drawn to those than to kind of, you know, the whatever, you know, the endless going through just the recounting of the story and working on that. And then, you know, when this thing that doesn't happen happened, that kind of made even more sense, because it just seems so obvious that so much of what we hold is in that, you know, it's in the psychophysical system, but I put a bit of stress on the physical side of that. Yeah.
I was talking to another friend, a friend that has not heard of spirituality or not interested in spirituality and not heard of non-duality. We were just drinking a couple of pints, and then we were started talking about this, and he started challenging me with you know, with non-duality, and then his eyes lit up and was like, and then he went to the washroom, threw up a lot. You know, we only drank maybe one pint or 2 pints of beer at that time, and he came back and he goes, there's no one. There's absolutely no one. And the opposite to the other person, you know, to the other person's experience, this experience was just blissful. He still calls me once in a while and tells me that, oh, I just looked at the trees today and just looked at it for a couple of hours, Emerson. So how do you explain that you know, what happens usually? You know, that's the opposite of what I was saying earlier. The other person, you know, just went into depths of depression, and the other person kind of like went, had the initial of kind of like throwing up and feeling kind of like, what, you know, was completely shocked by it, and now is in a blissful existence.
Yeah. Well, what's the question?
How do you explain that? You know, there's the explain that, you know, and then there's the opposite side of it, where everybody's just kind of like kind of like had a Kundalini awakening almost, you know, like everybody just walks around, or, you know what I'm getting at, you know, kind of like your experience. It was just blissful. You saw trees and all this kind of stuff with energies. And
yeah, I mean, it comes up different for different people, doesn't it? And yeah, I mean, because if you get the blissful stuff, all you can do really is indulge to that, you know. But yeah, I mean, I haven't come across negative well, maybe with the Kundalini stuff, because that tends to be, a lot of people have a real hard time with that stuff, and trying to differentiate what's actually maybe psychosis as well can emerge at the same time with that. So yeah, that can be really tricky. Some people have a real tricky run with that stuff. Personally, I haven't had any difficulty with my own Kundalini experiences. I just find them good fun, actually, just really interesting. So yeah, a lot of people get that at the same time, but the Kundalini with the awakening all around, you know, around that time. For me, it was like that sort of roller coaster of Kundalini experiences after and before. So yeah,
that kind of initial awakening, which often happens, which I described in my case, which was very momentary, right? I think that is often followed by a very uncomfortable period. Very often despair is reported, and there's kind of, you know, there are phrases in lots of traditions, you know, like the dark night of the soul, being in the desert. And so it's certainly how it felt here, being in the desert and the dark night of the soul combined. I think that's a pretty common experience. It's like, you know, it's like the shock of seeing, I mean, this is a kind of mental construct in a way, but it felt very real here. It's like the shock of being in this situation where all the dilemma of separation still seems to be there, but it's been seen that there's nobody inside this who can do anything about it. So I think that's what may account for the despair. I think that's what accounted for the despair in my case. You know, the dark night of the soul. Yeah, that's the recognition of empty, but in a way you could say it's the recognition of emptiness without seeing the fullness. You know, the recognition of emptiness, and then what goes along with that is, well, there is just emptiness, so there's no one here who can do anything about their dilemma, and yet the feeling of the dilemma is still there. So despair is not at all unusual for a while.
Yeah, about maybe 10 years ago, my timeline's all screwed up. I had a glimpse, like a giant one. It was a Kundalini one. I was walking down the street and I just did kind of like a teacher training for 200 hours. I was ready to teach. I was feeling really spiritually higher than everybody else. And I had mala beads on. I was drinking kombucha tea, and I was feeling really holy. And then I encountered a street that had a lot of addiction happening. There was heroin addiction. So I got out of the street area right away and petrified that I ended up in a bad area. And then I kind of like thought to myself, I'm like, after, thousands of hours of meditation, I don't have compassion yet. So I redid it. The next day I went back, took my dog and just looked at my dog and how my dog accepted everyone. And I just kind of like looked at that. And then all of a sudden there's like a burst in the heart, like my heart opened. And then I became the drug addict that's shooting up heroin on the street. I became the nuns that are helping the people with addictions. And I think that lasted for quite a while. And I thought that I didn't even have a word for it. I opened up a center, I helped people, and then that came crashing down. And then I think the despair, the depression in the beginning is I just wanted to have that again. I wanted to have that high again. And I know it's accessible, but I can't seem to have it anymore. And then when the apparent happened, it didn't happen to anyone. It was just so normal. It's almost kind of like it was almost anticlimactic. I was like, oh, wow. My question is, a lot of people are probably had that initial, Kundalini or glimpse or a glance or whatever. And they usually go through kind of like what you were saying, Richard, they go through this despair, dark night of the soul. What should one do about that? When they're going through this, when they've had that initial Kundalini awakening and they can't seem to have that anymore.
It's tarrying with it, isn't it? But usually when that Kundalini stuff arises, I mean, it often does reappear at some stage. But yeah, I mean, I think all you can do is stick with that. I mean, I also had after my initial awakening, which was, it is a non-event, and it was very flat, and there was no motivation to do anything. It was like living dead in a sense, but you're just tarrying with it, really. Because there's nothing you can say to make that any better in a way. But again, it's just staying with it and being able to talk through it. It's a difficult one. I don't know. And the Kundalini stuff is coming down from a high. It really is. But yeah, there's not much you can do, really.
No, I've had many people ask me sort of that question, similar questions in that state. I'll call it a state. And I mean, all I can say in a way is, be kind to yourself. And some advice I was given when I was in that state and I sort of passed on. It kind of sounds in a way kind of banal, particularly to anyone who's psychologically or psychotherapeutically sophisticated. In fact, whenever I said it, I'd always feel like apologizing for its banality, which is just, if there's some small, simple thing that you enjoy doing, do it. That's it, and be kind to yourself and relax if you can. And I mean, as I say it now, I mean, I've said that dozens of times, probably hundreds of times, and even now as I say it again, I feel faintly embarrassed about it, but I can't better it.
Which comes to the next question, with the free will thing and suffering. Yeah. How do you integrate the two? No free will and suffering.
No free will. Well, just because there's no free will doesn't mean to say, I mean, suffering, it depends on the kind of suffering. I mean, there is stuff you can do. I mean, there's no one doing that, but nevertheless, you know, depending on the kind of suffering, I mean, you can, again, talking through something is in a way, somebody is holding that. There's a lightness to that. There's also, if there's trauma there, you can meditate. You can take pills if things are really bad. There's nothing, you know, it doesn't make any difference in the sense that free will's not there. I mean, still, if you have the know-how or know what to do, you can still do the same things as you did before for seeking, you know, ease from suffering, you know, self-care, and I don't know. Yeah, and I don't see the problem, free will or no free will, that makes, you know, to dealing with suffering. It's not, you know, things are the same as before. It's just no one's doing that. No one's going to psychotherapy. No one's meditating. No one's, you know, talking through their problems or doing body work or whatever it is that works for you, or, you know. But
I mean, even without bringing in suffering, the whole area of free will is a very good way to start a fight with people. To be honest, the denial of free will. If you want to have an argument, that's one of the quickest ways to get to it with many people. You don't even have to bring in suffering for that. Yeah, suffering is suffering, free will or not.
Yeah, I think a lot of people start, you know, seeking. It's almost like a twin of seeking is suffering, right? It's almost like synonymous, you know, like when someone is seeking, it means that there's suffering happening. Yeah, maybe I'm just, you know, explaining this from my experience. I think when I started seeking, well, I've always been seeking, you know, ever since I was a kid, I guess. But when the spiritual seeking kind of like came about, there was something that I wanted to escape, you know. This is inescapable. And a lot of people want to escape situations, escape the character, and all that kind of stuff like that. So seeking was my way of escapism. It almost became a drug. It almost became like, well, I guess it was an addiction. I told you, Richard, that I would be reading like 10, 20 books at a time, kind of like going back and forth, kind of like one of those kind of like conspiracy theorists. I would circle the book. I'm like, well, he means it this way. And maybe if I just listen to Tony and then rewind what Jim said, I will crack the code. So is seeking kind of like an addiction or kind of like almost like a mental illness?
It's mysterious. I mean, because it's not either. It's not it's just all consuming, and it just seems that, I don't know, because it's not like it's more consuming than an addiction. All of your energy is just going into that. I mean, it's totally mysterious. Once that comes, and it may not be the first time you've heard of non-duality, but whenever it takes hold, it's you. And then to tell someone not to do that or to stop, I mean, that's like asking them not to breathe. So you know, in a sense, that's where I would go and meditate. You know, okay, so just you know, just, I don't know, indulge that energy and don't try to not do it just because there's no, you know, guarantee of anything opening you up to this, you know. Yeah, it's hard. But
the first time I came across non-duality, there was absolutely no interest whatsoever here. I just went away from it, totally bored, totally uninterested. This has definitely not got anything for me, particularly after my kind of many years of sort of seeking through much more exciting things like following the guru and so forth. And about maybe 2 or 3 years later, you know, I just happened, and it really was like that. I just happened in a rather bored way to find myself back at another meeting, and that time, bang, and you know, the tiger bit, and it was it, and you know, it was an obsession, and I just, you know, I couldn't get away from it. I didn't want to get away from it. I wouldn't even try to explain the difference between those two occasions. I mean, why bother? I mean, I'm sure if we wanted to, we could come up with some theory to do with my karma or something like that, but You know, why bother? It would always just be a story. And the fact is that that is what happened.
It was magical time as well. There's something quite juicy about seeking and the conversations around it. I mean, I love.
I agree. Magical time too. Yeah.
The friendships you make around it, you know, wow, cool. So it's fun.
But there was somehow, for me also, there was something absolutely magical about that, but also very distinctly different to the kind of magical stuff that I'd experienced before. Like, for example, what I'll call it a guru cult, in which there was absolute devotion and total belief here for a while until there wasn't. That was also magical, but in a very different way and in a much less grounded way. Yeah. There's something much saner, I think, about the magic, for me anyway. There was something much saner around about the magic of the non-duality fixation.
In this story, this character was also there's this period that I absolutely hated, non-duality. And I was just sick of it. I was bored with it. And I think, you know what, Richard, I deleted your book. And then I deleted your book because I was angry at you. I was angry at Tony and Jim, and I bought your book again. So you got two sales from one person.
Profoundly great.
Yeah. Because there's this love-hate relationship. I hated it so much because I'm like, well, this is a scam. This has to be a scam. This can't be true. And then I hated it, and I'm not really active on social media, but if I was active on social media, I would have kind of like typed a whole bunch of hateful stuff about it, because there was one period of time that I was convinced that this was not real. And it was just, you know, because I wanted to have some proof. So in your opinion, why do people go through this like love? In the beginning, it's kind of like, oh, it's kind of like the freshest thing you've ever heard. And then after not, because no one can get it, you know, let's be honest, no one can get it. So the character wanted to get it so bad that it gets into this hate relationship with it. Any comment on that?
Well, yeah, because initially it's almost like a spiritual ego, isn't it? That you've got something good to focus on, and there's hope and end of suffering, and yeah, I guess, and then you're just hitting your head against a brick wall too many times. I guess it turns sour eventually. I don't know. Don't think I got to that phase. I was only into a couple of months, so. Yeah.
I think the only thing I could add to that is frustration. I think it may be about frustration. I mean, I didn't go through that stage either. I got immensely, immensely frustrated, so frustrated, but it didn't turn into that, you know, anger or turning away from it, or, oh, this must be a scam. But I think it's tremendously frustrating, because, I mean, for me, I mean, sitting, listening to non-duality speakers as I did, you know, very fixedly, I'm going to say, rather than devotedly, for I can't remember how long, maybe a year or two, I can't even remember. It seemed to me, in a way, it was pretty much like banging my head against the same mountain that I might be banging my head against if it was Zen. There's something very Zen about the pure non-dual communication, whatever that is. And I began to realize after quite a long time, and it helped me to relax into it a little bit, I think, after a while, was that there was absolutely all these incredibly important, incredibly central, devastatingly life-important questions that had to be answered. It eventually began to dawn on me after a while. There was no hope of them being answered. That every answer was, you know, it begged so many more questions. It was the questions were impossible to answer, and I came up with this metaphor. It kind of worked for me, that I felt like I was trying to climb a mountain by banging a peg in. Every question I asked, I'd bang a peg into the mountain, and the hope was that the answer would enable me to pull myself up. Then I'd be a little bit higher up the mountain. And on my spiritual paths, particularly with the guru, that worked brilliantly. You know, every answer gave me a little bit more spiritual understanding and a little bit more spiritual depth. Oh, how wonderful. Worked beautifully. With non-duality, you know, I bang the peg in, take hold of it, haul myself up on it, the peg would fall out of the rock and I just fall on my arse. And that happened over and over and over and over again. And eventually, I suppose, the soreness of my arse was sufficient to reach my head, you know, and so at that point, something in me had this realization and kind of gave up. You know, these questions are not going to be answered in a way that's satisfactory to the mind. There is no possibility of that. I'm not kind of touting that as a method. If I could, I would, but I'm not. It's just what happened here.
Yep. Yeah. For me, it was I was reading a lot of books, and I think I've exhausted all the Audible books about during that time. You know, non-duality was not really an Audible, so I would type in consciousness awareness. So I think I have like about 30 books about that, and exhausted all of that. And I think I encountered Tony's video, one of the meetings on and again the love came back again. It was kind of like a like, oh wow, because I was intellectual, I was comparing it. I think what I was doing is comparing different kinds of non-duality, you know, different kinds of book. I'm like, well, this person said there's a technique, and then there's non-doership. It was just all so confusing. So it became a hate kind of thing, that this must be, you know what, no one is telling me the truth here. Give me the truth. But there's no truth. And it's just it was just a, you know, now looking back, I think after that, you know, after that kind of like apparent seeking thing, there was just laughter. I was just laughing at the videos. I think I would watch a couple of videos of Tony and Jim. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's just so simple and it's just so funny. Was there any laughter in your experience? You know, was there kind of like almost like a biggest joke kind of like a experience?
I didn't have that in the awakening. It's not really, no. But I did have I just had an experience with a friend once talking on the phone about our problems, and I remember just the very word "our problems," and the two of us just started crying with laughter and went on and on and on and on. But in the actual awakening, no, I didn't. Although I did find it funny, I did find that just watching people try to articulate things that are so small, like there's nothing, just absolutely nothing important as compared to this, you know. But yeah, what about you?
I didn't have that kind. I've heard of these cases, but I didn't have that sort of experience of kind of laughter myself. But it's just reminded me of a story of someone in England who I sort of met some time ago, and they came home from doing their shopping into their kitchen, and that's, you know, it happened then, and there was the seeing that everything was love, and they put down their shopping and started kissing their kitchen cupboards as they realized their kitchen cupboards were unadulterated, all-encompassing love. Yeah. So anything can happen.
That's a good one.
But it is, it's understand. I mean, it's not a cosmic joke, it is the cosmic joke.
It's the cosmic joke, that's right.
So it's not surprising that often it is greeted with laughter. When the joke is got, it's greeted with laughter.
That's right. I was trying to explain it to someone, kind of like, I'm talking to a friend, I'm like, it's like, you know, those movies with a lot of plot twists. This is the ultimate plot twist that you never saw coming, you know, because you will never see it coming. It's kind of
because I mean, it takes me back to that, the initial shock for me, you know, of this thing that, you know, there's someone seeking for the secret must be out there, and then the absolute shock of seeing that the secret is that there is nobody doing that seeking, and that is absolutely the ultimate joke. Yeah.
Do you want to add something to that, Dawn? And
no, not really.
Let's talk about you do one-on-ones right now, Don. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, yeah, it seems to be mostly, people who've had awakenings and aren't, sure, and seems to be a theme for, looking for a bit of validation or thinking it should be a certain way, and people thinking they've got it, and the next week, no, maybe I don't. There's a lot of conditioning. Seems to be like people watch a lot of people on YouTube, and then they think, I think because people are talking, and you can't see their internal experience, so they say, oh, God, they really have it because they're so confident, or so there's this sort of constant comparison thing that seems to go on, or that it should be a certain way. Somebody's emphasizing something in a certain way that makes it sound bigger than maybe what they're experiencing. So there's a lot of it's difficult, I think, because there's so many people out there, and then they'll meet maybe they'll come across another non-duality speaker who says that there's all these stages to awakening, and maybe I'm missing the last one. And so, yeah, I mean, it's confusing for people. And if they've kind of been a people pleaser type person as well, I think they find it very difficult to see themselves as someone who's, awakened, or to even talk about that. So there's a lot of people are actually quite scared to express what they have experienced, and getting it wrong, all these things. Yeah, it's interesting. It's quite fun.
I have sorry, go ahead, Richard.
I was just going to add, one of the themes that I come across pretty commonly amongst the people, that I speak to individually is, well, if this is it, it should be better than this. And that can be a core doubt, this can't be it because I'm not having enough fun if this is it. And I mean, we can hear the contradiction in that in a way, but I think that's often at the heart of, the questions that come.
I think a lot of people that have a lot of spiritual seeking background, like I did, a lot of that kind of like, meditation, a lot of, read a lot of kind of like scriptures and that kind of stuff, had a different idea of what this apparent, thing that we're talking about is. So it almost becomes kind of like almost like a disappointment, yeah. or hanging on to those ideas that there must be some technique, there must be a way of getting this, and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of spiritual hangups with people with this one.
If I think back to my guru days, and the ideas that I had then about the enlightened being, the enlightened person. I mean, they were simply a super being, a superman or a superwoman. They could do anything effortlessly. I mean, it was kind of just sort of mad. And then if I think back to some of the miracle stories that I would come across on the path that would be shared, from devotee to devotee in hushed whispers, do you know what Guruji did yesterday? And then, there would be a story, would be dwelt upon, a story of absolutely staggering banality. And yet we would listen to it like that, and we would believe every word, I've just remembered, I won't go into the detail, but I've just remembered a story that Stephen Batchelor tells from his very early days of seeking, a miracle story about a Lama. And he recounted this miracle that he had actually witnessed, in hushed tones of reverence the next day. And he said, even as I told this story for the first time, I knew it was a lie. And there's something very revealing about that, and very honest as well.
I just remember that when I was a teacher before, there was a student that kind of like told me that I know what your CD is, your superpower is. And I'm like, what is it? Yeah. And he goes, you make people dance to unconditional love. I'm like, because I'm a DJ. Yet it's just a lot of projections of what do you want you to be this super being or something, and and it's just it is just so absolutely normal. There's nothing special about it. And I think that's in a lot of my interviews. It's just trying to explain that over and over again, that there's nothing special about it. There's nothing, no one can, it's not an attainment thing. It's not a badge that you can get or a certification of enlightenment. Did you get yours yet, Richard?
Well,
You
yeah,
was sent, you got it, right? Did you, is it laminated somewhere? Yeah.
It's in the study. I'll go and get it if you like.
How about you, Don? Did you get yours? You got a double now one, right? Because there's the one for enlightened psychotherapists as well. So you have a double.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, to be honest, I think you should be able to see the golden glow, and that should be enough to.
It's really obvious to me. I don't know if the audience can see it.
Well, I hope it will be obvious to you, Emerson, because frankly, if anyone can't see it, it can only be because their chakras are not sufficiently open.
It's not aligned.
At that.
All right. I think that's the hour. Thank you so much.